So the duck is flapping now. The next thing to do is to get it moving. So if we have a look at this duck object, we've got its transform and sprite renderer. We've also got the animator attached to it, which controls the animation. Now, one of the things this duck has to do is fall out of the sky, and I can do that simply by adding a rigid body to it, which makes it obey gravity. Now, you might remember that with a rigid body, we've got a number of options: dynamic, kinematic, or static. It's certainly not going to be static. If we choose kinematic, it's not affected by any of the physics systems, so it won't fall. Its movement will be controlled by a script. So I'm going to keep it at dynamic so that it can fall out of the sky, but keep that in mind that we've got this kinematic option as well. We've also got the mass and the gravity scale, which we've looked at before. We want to be able to hit this duck as well using the mouse, so I'm going to also add in, I'm going to collapse that up for a little bit so we've got a bit more room. I'm going to add in another component in the physics 2D, which is a box collider. There's our box collider, which defines the hit area. I'm going to make this a bit smaller, simply because it makes the duck more difficult to hit. So we're not going to be able to hit it by clicking on the beak or the tail. That'll be our hit area. There. So we have to be able to click within that rectangle to claim a bag. The other thing I'm going to add to this is a script which I've just created. It's going to be called duck control. So I'm going to add this in. And let's edit that script. This is going to control its movement. Here we are in duck control. Now, when we play the game, the ducks are actually going to be created in real time. They're going to be spawned. So there's no point in adding any public variables at all, because we don't have a chance to access them. So all of the class variables are going to be private. Here are a few of them. So I want to have access to its rigid body 2D component. Make sure you keep the rigid body 2D in. I'm going to call that RB2D. I'm also going to need access to the animator component, so I'm going to add that in as well. And I'm going to call that anim. There are a couple of other private variables I need now. I'm going to have a vector3, which I'm going to call movement, and this is the movement that the duck is going to make with every frame. At some point this duck might very well be shot, so we need to know whether it's alive or not. So I'm going to make a boolean and call it alive. That'll be enough to keep us going for the moment, but we'll need to add a few more things on as we go on. Right, so we need to instantiate all of these elements. So I'm going to put the RB2D, which is the rigid body 2D component. And we're going to set that as get component, rigid body 2D, and that gives us a reference to the rigid body component that we added in earlier on. And we also need to get the animator reference as well. So this is the way to get hold of any of our component elements. Now, of course, when we start off, the live is true. Now, the movement. I want these ducks to move from right to left across the screen. So in the X direction, it's going to be negative. But I also want them to have a little bit of up and down movement as well, just for a bit of variation. So I'm going to call movement. It's new vector 3. And I'm going to add in a little bit of variation here by using random numbers. A bit wrong there. So I'm going to use this sort of -10, and this is a floating point number, so that's the minimum, and the maximum speed is going to be -4f. So in the X direction, it's going to be a number between -4 and -10, which should ensure that it goes in the left direction. Now I've got the Y axis to consider. I'm going to put another random number in here. I'm going to put the minimum is going to be -1f and the maximum is going to be 1f. So it'll either go slightly up or slightly down. We also need a Z component, which is in and out, but that's going to be set to 0. So that determines the range of the movement. Okay, so in the update function now, we're only going to move it if it's alive. There's one more thing we need to do in this start. Now, this rigid body, we said it's going to be dynamic, but at the start, when it's alive, I want it to be kinematic. So there's an option to change it into kinematic. So is kinematic equals true. Now the rigid body 2D is kinematic, it won't fall. I'm going to put this in the fixed update. So it's not called once per frame. I'm going to remove that comment. Now, if this duck is alive, we're going to move it. So we're going to check that. If alive, then we're going to move the transform. So we can do that simply by using the transform.translate. And we've got our vector 3, which is movement. I'm going to scale that using time dot. So the movement is per second, of course, and we're thinking about this in terms of fractions of a second. Right, so that will happen as long as it's alive. It'll move across the screen. Now we need to know what happens if the duck is hit. So we're going to put a new function in here. It's going to return void, and this is on. Now, if a game object has a collider on it, it will react to clicking on it with the left mouse button. So let's put in the body of that. Now the first thing is, if it's not alive, we can't get any more points for it. So if it's not alive, we're just going to return. So from now on we assume it is alive. So at this point we'll say, well, it's no longer alive. And now we're going to change the animation to the falling one. So if you remember, we just need to set the trigger. So we've got set trigger, and we called it die. If you used a capital letter in the trigger, make sure you use a capital letter here as well. And we're also going to set the kinematic property to be false on the rigid body. So that will reinstate the gravity on this. Right, let's just check the code. Seems to be no errors there, which is good. And we'll return to the game. Bring that back down to normal size. Let's zoom out here. We just moved it onto the left of the screen just to test its movement. Now it should fly across the screen. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm going to try my gaming skills here by trying to click on the duck as it moves across the screen. So I'm going to run it again and try to hit the thing.